the Hollywood Unapologetic Podcast with Orlando Delbert, Filmmaking Essentials. Today we're tackling something really vital, I think, for just navigating the world around us. How misinformation really takes hold, and, how democratic principles can sometimes be chipped away at.
Right. It's about becoming more aware.
Exactly. Think of this as sort of getting a better lens to see through the noise, maybe, to understand the information you come across every day. Hopefully you'll feel a bit more informed, less susceptible to manipulation.
Yeah, definitely. And we've pulled together some really, I think, interesting material for this. We're looking at historical stuff on propaganda, how authoritarian regimes work, but also like current online chats, detailed reports.
So a real mix.
A real mix. And the goal today really is to pinpoint these core strategies. We'll talk about the big lie, that concept. We'll look at different propaganda tricks and what people call the authoritarian playbook.
Okay.
By the end, hopefully you'll, spot these patterns more easily when you're scrolling or watching the news.
Great. Okay, let's jump right in then. The big lie. It sounds dramatic, but it's a specific concept, isn't it?
It really is. It's not just, telling a fib. It comes from Hitler, actually, from Mein Kampf.
Right.
And his idea was it's a lie so enormous, so colossal, that people find it easier to believe than a small lie.
Why? That seems backwards.
Well, his twisted thinking was that people themselves tell small lies, but they just can't imagine anyone having the sheer nerve to make up something so incredibly false. The audacity makes it seem weirdly plausible to some.
Wow. Okay. And didn't he then sort of accuse others of doing this?
He did. It's quite something. He accused Jewish people of using this exact technique to falsely blame Germany's loss in World War I on General Ludendorff.
Oh.
But then, as the historian Jeffrey Herf points out, the Nazis themselves became the masters of the big lie.
How so?
They pushed this relentless narrative that Germany was just an innocent victim, a victim of international Jewry, as they put it.
Which was completely fabricated.
Completely.
Yeah.
And it was this fabrication they used to justify the Holocaust. It's chilling.
Yeah, it really is. And the specifics of that narrative, they claim Jewish people secretly controlled Britain, Russia, the U.S.
Exactly. Huge controlling power.
Yeah.
They even claimed Jews had started a war of extermination against Germany.
A total inversion of reality.
The complete inversion. And they framed their genocide as self-defense. It makes you really stop and think, how could such a frankly absurd claim actually gain traction?
It does. And then there's Goebbels, the propaganda minister. He had these rules.
Yeah, allegedly he laid out these principles for effective propaganda. And what's disturbing is how familiar some of them sound even today.
Like what?
Things like never let the public cool off or think too hard. Never admit you're wrong, ever. Never say anything good about your enemy. Always, always focus all the blame on one single enemy.
Keep it simple, keep it focused, keep repeating it.
And that repetition point is key. He supposedly believed people swallow a big lie faster than a small one, especially if you just keep hammering it home. It's like you overwhelm them. And interestingly, a U.S. psychological profile of Hitler back in 1943, it noted similar things. He never accepted blame, always had one enemy, always looking for ways to stir things up, like understanding the manipulator's handbook.
Okay, so fast forward. How does this connect to, say, recent times?
Well, a really prominent example people point to is Donald Trump's claims about the 2020 election being stolen.
Right, the sheer persistence of that claim.
It's exactly. The scale, the repetition across so many channels. And we saw the direct link to the violence at the U.S. Capitol. Plus, many reports later suggested he likely knew he'd lost.
Yeah. So let's get into the why. Why does this tactic work? It seems it needs constant repetition, right?
Yeah.
Across different media.
Absolutely. Constant reinforcement. But there's also a psychological element. People might already want to believe it for whatever reason, if it's a narrative they're comfortable with, maybe.
Regardless of the facts.
Regardless of the facts. Hitler himself talked about a sort of primitive simplicity in people's minds, making them vulnerable to these huge lies.
But it's important to say, the term big lie itself gets used in different ways too, doesn't it? It's become a political tool itself.
That's a crucial point, yes. It hasn't only been applied to the election claims. We saw people like William Barr, Newt Gingrich, use it to describe the Trump-Russia collusion allegations.
Okay.
And later, Republicans used it when talking about voter ID laws, or when Democrats opposed changing filibuster rules for voting rights. So the label itself gets thrown around to discredit opponents.
So the accusation becomes a weapon. Timothy Snyder made a point about this, didn't he? That repetition can make the lie feel like its own evidence.
Yeah, exactly. If you hear it enough from enough places you trust, it starts to feel like common knowledge, like the truth. People might just not conceive that leaders could manipulate things so blatantly.
And others, like Bowers, Abbott, and Blanchard, they added some interesting nuances.
They did. Bowers Abbott stressed it's not just repeating the exact same phrase, but the lie echoing in different forms, different contexts. That really cements it.
And Blanchard, he had that point about merchandise.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Like novelty items, slogans on hats or whatever. It seems trivial, but he argued it can actually normalize the lie. It makes it seem less serious, more like a badge of identity or an inside joke.
That's a subtle but powerful idea. Normalization through everyday stuff. Blanchard also talked about belief being kind of transactional.
Right. People might not fully factually believe it deep down, but they accept it provisionally because it does something for them.
Like what?
Maybe it's entertaining, maybe it confirms their group identity, makes them feel like they belong, or it's just a way to vent anger they already feel. Belief tied to usefulness, basically.
And the emotional side. Bandy X. Lee talked about that.
Yeah, psychiatrist Bandy X. Lee emphasizes the emotional comfort aspect. Accepting these lies can be a way to avoid difficult truths, especially when people feel stressed or insecure. The repetition can almost be soothing in a weird way. It's easier to cling to a familiar, even if false story than face something unsettling, which echoes Walter Langer's original thinking about Hitler's methods, actually.
And social media just pours fuel on this fire, presumably.
Seems like it. Bowers Abbott noted that once people state a belief online, publicly, it's really hard to back down. Admitting you were wrong feels embarrassing.
So they double down.
They double down, defend the lie to protect their own image.
So if someone's caught up in this, what actually works to change their mind? The experts seem to agree just throwing facts at them isn't usually enough.
Yeah, that's the consensus from people like Dervasila, Blanchard, Lee. Facts alone often bounce off. It needs more.
Like
better critical thinking skills across the board, access to genuinely diverse, reliable information, creating spaces where people can actually talk, even disagree respectfully, and importantly, accountability for those who knowingly spread the big lies.
And Lee also mentioned addressing the root causes, right? Like underlying anxieties.
Yes, crucially. Addressing things like socioeconomic inequality, the anxieties and vulnerabilities that make people more susceptible to these kinds of manipulations in the first place.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack on the big lie. Let's shift gears slightly now to propaganda more broadly. We often think propaganda lies, but it's more nuanced, isn't it?
It is. At its core, propaganda is just communication designed to get a specific response. It can be true or partly true. It's about the intent and the crafting.
Like in World War II, the U.S. government used it extensively.
Oh, absolutely. The Office of War Information, the OWI, they had clear goals.
Such as?
Well, getting people to enlist, obviously. Raising money through war bonds. Unifying the public, a big task in diverse America, and stamping out dissent. Getting people to conserve resources, boost factory output. It was a massive effort.
And we all know those posters, right? Loose lips might sink ships.
Classic example. That was about being careful what you say. Then you had conservation appeals. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Intense stuff.
Yeah.
Plus promoting civil defense, victory gardens, war bars, and of course, Rosie the Riveter, women power. And naturally, very negative images of the Germans and Japanese.
So what techniques were they using? You mentioned fear, obviously.
Fear, definitely. Also the bandwagon effect, making people feel like everyone else is doing it, so they should too.
Social pressure.
Exactly. Then there's name-calling, demonizing the enemy, using euphemisms to soften harsh realities, glittering generalities, these vague positive words like freedom or democracy that everyone likes but are hard to define.
Okay.
Transfer, linking the cause to symbols of authority or respect, or conversely to negative symbols, and testimonials, getting supposedly credible people to endorse the message.
It's quite a toolkit, and it's striking how these old techniques still pop up, even in places like Reddit.
Yeah, that Reddit discussion we looked at was insightful. They used this example of a truck driver, how the story's framed completely changes your reaction.
It was so.
Well, is it lazy trucker falls asleep, your reaction is anger at the driver? Or is it exhausted driver, forced into long hours, robbed on roadside? Now you feel sympathy, maybe anger at the system.
Same incident. Totally different emotional pull depending on the framing.
Precisely. The framing, what information gets highlighted, what gets left out, it guides the audience. Is the goal to make you mad at workers? Sympathize? push for regulations, push for being tough on crime. A neutral report would just try to state the facts.
That Reddit thread also hit on how presentation matters as much as content, like that misleading statistic example.
Oh yeah, the Canadian public transit one. That was clever in a sneaky way.
Remind us.
The headline might blast, 85% of Canadians lack transit access. Sounds shocking. But then the tiny print reveals the poll was done only in some remote rural area. Totally misrepresents the situation for most Canadians and cities.
Technically true, but deliberately deceptive.
Exactly. Which brings us back to checking the source, right? Who did the poll? Where? When? Same for quotes a doctor says. Isn't the same as Dr. Jane Smith, head of cardiology at major hospital, says.
Right, check the credentials. But distinguish that from just attacking the person. The ad hominem attack, which is itself a propaganda tactic.
Good point. Focus on the argument, not just smearing the person making it.
The Reddit discussion also flagged checking your own emotions. Right?
Yeah.
If something makes you instantly furious.
Yeah, that's a potential red flag. Pause and ask why. Are you being manipulated? And they made another great point. The best propaganda often doesn't look like propaganda at all.
How do you mean?
It might be slipped into a funny tweet, a meme, something that seems harmless. It bypasses your critical filters more easily.
Sneaky. And the misuse of charts and graphs.
Oh, yeah. Quick flashes on screen. Looks official, looks like data. But it's designed to leave an impression, not convey real, understandable information. Very common.
So the Reddit advice boiled down to be skeptical, look for specifics, check multiple sources with different viewpoints if possible.
Go to the original source. If you can read the actual bill, not just the summary.
There.
Be wary of easy answers to complex problems and consider the source's track record and motives. Really practical stuff.
Okay, great advice. Now let's move to our final piece, this idea of an authoritarian playbook. What's that about?
This comes from a report by the group Protect Democracy. It basically outlines a set of common strategies, they call them plays, that leaders or movements use when they want to undermine democracy and grab more power. They often work together.
Okay, like a checklist for eroding democracy. What are some of these plays?
There are 7 key ones they identified. First is politicizing independent institutions, weakening those checks and balances, turning things like courts, election bodies, even statistic agencies into tools for the party in power or shields to protect them.
Got an example.
They mention Argentina manipulating inflation stats years ago. Or, more recently, concerns raised about attacks on the Department of Justice or election administration in the U.S.
Okay, number 1, politicize institutions. What's next?
Number 2, spreading disinformation. We've touched on this a lot. Propagating lies to hurt opponents, rally your base, create smokescreens for what you're really doing.
Like the fire hose of falsehood idea from Russia.
Exactly. Sometimes the goal isn't even to make people believe one specific lie, but just to flood the zone with so much confusing, contradictory stuff that people give up trying to figure out what's true.
Yeah.
Mass doubt and confusion.
Okay, play number 3.
Aggrandizing executive power. Weakening checks and balances, basically concentrating power in the leader's hands. Undermining parliaments, courts, often goes hand in hand with building a personality cult around the leader.
Where have we seen this?
Hungary under Orban is often cited, where institutions have been steadily weakened. In the U.S. context, debates around the expansion of executive power via emergency declarations, pardons, or ignoring congressional oversight fit here, though there's also a history of pushback, like against FDR's court-packing plan.
Right, so 4th play.
Quashing criticism or dissent. This is pretty straightforward. Movements trying to consolidate power always try to silence opposition, independent media, NGOs, whistleblowers, anyone who might challenge them.
Example.
The report mentions the harsh treatment of journalists in the Philippines, and in the U.S., the way LT Carl Alexander Vindman was attacked after his testimony during impeachment proceedings.
Okay. What's the play number 5?
Scapegoating vulnerable communities. A classic authoritarian move. Dehumanize and target a specific group, immigrants, minorities, to build an us versus them mentality and rally your base against this perceived internal enemy.
Creates unity through exclusion.
Precisely. Think of the BJP's actions regarding Muslims in India, or how many far-right parties across Europe target immigrants.
Makes sense. Number 6.
Corrupting elections. This isn't always about stuffing ballot boxes necessarily. It's about tilting the playing field while keeping up the appearance of democracy.
Crown.
Voter suppression tactics, gerrymandering taken to extremes, biased election administration challenging legitimate results. Venezuela under Maduro is a stark example of manipulating election rules, and there have been serious concerns and debates about efforts to undermine election administration and norms in the U.S. too.
Okay, one more play left, number 7.
stoking violence. This is about using violence or the threat of it, maybe tacitly encouraging it, to undermine democratic norms, intimidate opponents, and erode public trust.
And potentially use the resulting chaos as an excuse to clamp down.
Exactly. Or just create a climate of fear. The rise in threats against election officials in the U.S. recently is a really worrying example of this.
And you said these plays often work together.
Definitely. They're interconnected. Spreading disinformation might be used to justify politicizing an institution, which then makes it easier to corrupt an election. And scapegoating might fuel violence. It's a reinforcing cycle.
So knowing this playbook exists, how should we, especially journalists, talk about potential threats? It seems like a fine line between raising alarms appropriately and, crying wolf.
It's a very tricky balance. The Protect Democracy report suggests 3 sort of balancing tests to help calibrate the response.
Okay, what are they?
First, how much does it deviate from modern precedent? Is this something like gerrymandering that's bad but has unfortunately happened before? Or is it something really radical, like trying to overturn a clear election result? The latter is a much bigger deviation.
Makes sense. Test number 2.
Degree of implementation. Is it just talk, a politician saying something extreme? Or are they actually taking concrete steps using the levers of power to make it happen? Rhetoric versus action.
Got it. And the third test?
Systemic risk. Does this action or pattern of actions fundamentally threaten the democratic system itself? Does it concentrate power dangerously? Does it weaken those essential checks and balances we talked about?
And it also matters who is doing it and whether others are stopping them,
Right.
like political parties.
Absolutely vital point. Is this an individual acting out, or is a major political party enabling or even driving this behavior? If institutions, especially parties, fail to check norm-breaking actions, the systemic risk is much higher.
Because otherwise we risk normalizing behavior that's actually really damaging.
Exactly that. There's a real danger of just getting used to things that should be alarming. So journalists and all of us really need to connect the dots, see individual incidents as part of this potential larger playbook.
But without overdoing the authoritarian label for everything.
Right. Context is key. Don't cry wolf, because then people stop listening when the real threat emerges. Understand the roles of allies, opponents, the public. It's complex.
Okay, so wrapping up today, we've covered a lot. The big lie, its history and mechanics, those propaganda techniques, old and new, and this framework, the authoritarian playbook.
Yeah, and hopefully understanding these things, how lies get traction, how messages are crafted to persuade or manipulate, how democratic norms can be systematically attacked, hopefully, this makes everyone a bit more equipped.
Equipped to be more critical consumers of information.
Exactly, to pause, to question, to look a bit deeper at the information hitting you from all sides.
So, maybe the encouragement is, think about these concepts as you go about your week. See if you spot these patterns in the media you consume. And actively try to seek out diverse, credible sources. Don't stay in an echo chamber.
Well said. Which leads us, I think, to a final thought, maybe a question for everyone listening to ponder.
Go for it.
In this world just drowning in information with so many competing stories, how do we as individuals really build and maintain the critical thinking skills we need? How do we effectively sort the truth from the manipulation, not just for ourselves, but to help safeguard democratic values for everyone?
You can find more insights on navigating the entertainment industry and achieving success in Orlando Delbert's work, including his book, Pollyanna's Tear-Soaked Battlefields of Hollywood, a survival guide against the cynicism and the hypocritical, and of course, the Hollywood Unapologetic platform. And always remember, you are the key to your own success. You are the new Hollywood generation.
Be informed, be prepared, and most importantly, be great.
That's it. Be great. Good luck out there.
See you next time.